The rain drummed softly on the glass walls of Nova Axis Corporation's high-rise headquarters, as if nature itself was trying to warn me. I remember watching the droplets trail down the pane beside my desk, each one racing the other to reach the bottom. I used to pretend they were alive, like little brushstrokes trying to outrun time. But that morning, I didn't have the luxury of daydreams. I had a gut feeling, and I should have listened. The office was unusually quiet. Even the usual clatter of keyboards and fake laughter in the break room seemed muted. Whispers floated down the hallway like smoke, curling under doors, clinging to shoulders. Something was coming. We all felt it. At exactly 10 a.m., an email pinged across the team inbox. Mandatory all-hands meeting. Conference room 5. Effective immediately. I gathered my notepad, out of habit more than necessity, and walked with the rest of the team to the glass-walled room at the end of the corridor. I tried not to look anxious, tried not to let my hands tremble, but my stomach. It knew. Inside, people sat like statues, stiff, uncertain. Darren Cole, the man who made entire departments tremble with a single raised eyebrow, walked in with 2 HR reps trailing behind like shadows. He wore his usual navy suit and that cruel little half-smile that made your skin itch. "Thank you for being here," he began, his voice calm and razor-sharp. "As part of our ongoing strategic alignment, we've had to make some difficult decisions regarding departmental efficiencies." And then his eyes locked onto mine. "Camille Turner," he said, slowly, deliberately, "after a thorough performance review, it has been determined that your role is no longer aligned with the goals of this company. Effective immediately, your position has been terminated." Silence. Utter, excruciating silence. The kind that makes your heartbeat sound like a bomb inside your ears. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mouth was dry. I couldn't even swallow. No one looked at me. Not a single colleague. Not Susan from accounting, who once cried in my office after a bad breakup. Not Jared, who I helped get promoted. Not even Linda, who sat next to me for 3 years and borrowed my mug every morning. They all stared down at their laps like children trying to disappear. "You may collect your belongings," Darren continued, already moving on to the next slide in his presentation as if he were discussing printer maintenance. Not gutting someone's dignity in public. I stood, but my legs betrayed me. They trembled. Every step toward the exit felt like wading through wet cement. I opened the door, stepped into the hallway. And that's when I saw him, Raymond Carter, janitor, 60-something, always polite, always invisible to everyone else. He stood at the end of the hallway with his mop cart beside him, hands folded in front of him like he was waiting for me. His eyes met mine, no pity, just calm. Like he already knew. I tried to smile, but my lips quivered. Then he walked toward me, slow and certain, and reached into his pocket. His hand emerged, closed around something. When he opened it, I saw a small golden key, slightly rusted at the edges, resting in his palm. "It's time," he whispered. I blinked, unsure if I heard him right. "Time for what?" He gave me a soft smile. The kind that comes from knowing something others don't. "To breathe, Camille," he said. "To finally breathe." I used to think crayons were magic. When I was 5, my mother brought home a small cardboard box of colored pencils from the dollar store. They were dull at the tips, smelled faintly of wood glue, and had no brand name. But to me, they were pure gold. I remember sitting on the wooden floor of our cramped living room in rural North Carolina, sketching anything I could imagine. Mountains I'd never seen, oceans I'd only heard about on TV, creatures from books I borrowed from the church library. My parents were simple people. My mom cleaned houses. My dad worked at a paper mill on alternating shifts. They loved me, but not in the way that leaves room for dreaming. They loved me like people who are tired, worried about bills, and terrified of risks. "You draw real nice," my dad said once, glancing at one of my early sketches pinned to the fridge. "But art don't feed the stomach, Camille. You need a job that'll keep you off your knees. I didn't understand then what off your knees meant. I do now. By the time I was 10, my bedroom walls were covered in sketches. I used everything: napkins, the backs of homework sheets, brown paper bags. I drew late into the night, under the dim light of a desk lamp with a broken hinge. I felt alive when I drew, like I could breathe deeper, wider, like I belonged somewhere, even if it was only on paper. In middle school, one of my teachers, Ms. Reynolds, pulled my parents aside after a parent-teacher night. I remember sitting just outside the door, eavesdropping as she told them I had real talent, that there were scholarships, that art could be more than just a hobby, that someone with my eye could go far. My mother thanked her politely. My father didn't say much, but in the car ride home he said what mattered. We can't afford foolishness, Camille. You want to end up broke and begging? You want to be 30 and still living in our house? That night I put away my sketchbook for a week. I didn't draw a single line. It felt like I was trying to hold my breath underwater, and the days passed like slow suffocation. In high school, I worked part-time at a diner and used the money to save for college. I picked business administration because it was safe, because people said it had a future, because you can always draw on the weekends. But I didn't draw on the weekends. Most weekends I was too tired, or too guilty. By the time I turned 20, I had an associate's degree, a small scholarship and a job at a bank. I'd earned the approval of my family, and lost pieces of myself in the process. Once, during spring break, I visited an art exhibit at a local community college. I walked past rows of canvases, paint thick like frosting, colors leaping off the walls. I remember standing in front of one abstract piece for so long, the janitor asked me if I was lost. I was. I didn't say that out loud, but I was. By 23, I landed a full-time job at Nova Access Corporation in the finance department. Full benefits, steady pay, a cubicle with my name on a placard. My father said, "Now that's something to be proud of." I smiled, but inside, something small and bright flickered one last time before it dimmed. When I first walked into Nova Access Corporation, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd made peace with my choices. The building was all glass and steel, reflecting the sky like it had nothing to hide. Inside, everything smelled of fresh carpet and ambition. Polished surfaces, quiet elevators, perfect people in pressed shirts and expensive shoes. They gave me a small cubicle in the finance department with a view of a brick wall and a printer that jammed at least once a day. My job? Spreadsheets. Forecasting. Sitting in meetings where men with tight smiles and tight suits argued over decimal points and cost optimization strategies. No one ever mentioned beauty, or creativity, or the soul. Still, I told myself this was adulthood, that this was what people meant by success, but I couldn't stop the itch in my fingers. During lunch breaks, I started sneaking out to the back garden behind the building, a quiet patch of grass and 3 benches no one really used. I kept a small sketch pad tucked in my bag, its pages soft with wear. There, under the shade of a stubborn magnolia tree, I'd let my hand remember what my heart had nearly forgotten. I'd sketch the sharp lines of the building, the way sunlight danced on the concrete, the slouch of someone checking their phone in secret. I didn't draw with purpose. I drew to survive. That's where I met Raymond. He was pushing a mop bucket along the edge of the building when he saw me. He stopped, leaned on the handle, and tilted his head toward my sketchbook. "You've got the light," he said, voice gravelly but kind. "My Lorraine used to draw like that." I didn't know what to say. No one in the office ever spoke to Raymond. Most didn't even know his name. But I nodded, and that was enough. From then on, we'd talk every few days when our paths crossed. He told me about Lorraine, his late wife, a Sunday painter who never tried to sell her work, never cared if it was good enough. She painted because she had to, because, as Raymond said, it was the only way she could breathe. She set up a studio in the old tool shed behind our house, he told me once. Said it had the best light in the county. I never touched it after she passed. Couldn't bring myself to. I listened. That's all I did at first. Just listened. And in return, I told him little bits about myself. How I used to draw on paper bags as a kid. How I got accepted to an art program but turned it down. How I hadn't told anyone at work that I even owned a pencil. He never judged. Never told me I was foolish. He just said, Lorraine would have liked you. As the years passed, our conversations became my anchor. The only moments of truth in days filled with corporate jargon and artificial smiles. My coworkers? They barely noticed me unless they needed a report fixed or file located. I was dependable, quiet, invisible. Just how Darren liked his staff. But Raymond saw me. Not the employee. Not the spreadsheet girl. Me. Sometimes I think he knew before I did that something inside me was dying. Quietly. Slowly. And that someday I'd need a way back. I used to count the windows in the office tower across from mine. 52. Each a square of someone else's life. Other people with other dreams, clicking away behind glass. I wondered if any of them ever looked back at me. But maybe I had stopped being visible a long time ago. 3 years ago, things at Nova Access began to shift. Restructuring, they called it. More meetings, tighter deadlines, fewer people. Those who survived the cuts didn't celebrate. They worked harder, smiled less, aged faster. I was one of them, the lucky ones. Darren Cole had always been unpleasant, but after the layoffs he grew. Sharper, like he'd tasted blood and wanted more. His eyes scanned every room like a predator looking for the slowest in the herd. And for some reason he chose me. He'd call me out in meetings for missing the bigger picture, even when I wasn't the one presenting. He'd CC upper management on minor errors, things that didn't matter. And when I got them right, he never said a word. Silence became his weapon, and I stupidly took it. I told myself he was just stressed, that everyone was under pressure, that if I just worked harder, he'd back off. But it didn't matter how early I arrived, how late I stayed, how perfectly I formatted those wretched spreadsheets. He kept coming, and I kept shrinking. My sketch pad, once tucked safely in the side pocket of my bag, ended up buried at the bottom of a drawer. I hadn't opened it in months. Every time I thought about drawing again, I heard my father's voice in my head, "Art don't feed the stomach." There were mornings I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Hollow cheeks, tired eyes, a suit that fit too well because I had worn it too long. Somewhere along the line, I'd traded color for compliance, breath for balance sheets. I started sitting alone at lunch, not because I wanted to, but because no one noticed when I stopped showing up in the break room. My voice grew quiet. My laugh disappeared. I began to disappear. Raymond noticed. He didn't say much at first, just watched me as he passed in the hallway. One day he paused and said, "You're walking like you've got chains around your ankles." I gave a weak smile. "Just tired, Raymond." He didn't smile back. "No, Camille, it's not tired. It's something heavier." I wanted to cry then, right there, in front of the janitor with his mop and his eyes that saw too much. But I didn't. I swallowed it, like I always did, and walked away. That night, I went home, opened my drawer, and pulled out the sketch pad. I stared at the blank page for a long time. But I couldn't draw. My hand hovered over the paper like a ghost. I didn't know where to begin, or if I was even allowed to begin anymore. I closed the book and put it back. Some people burn out in flames. Me, I was fading. One spreadsheet at a time. I don't remember much of the walk back to my desk, just the cold hum of fluorescent lights and the click of my heels echoing louder than they should have. My name still hung in the air like a bruise. Camille Turner, terminated effective immediately, like I was a spreadsheet, reviewed, deemed irrelevant, and deleted. A cardboard box was already waiting for me on the edge of my desk. HR efficiency at its finest. Someone had even started packing for me. My framed photo of Mom, a ceramic mug that said Introverts Unite, separately the little plant I'd nursed through 4 winters. And my sketch pad, dusty, untouched, still closed. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at the items of a life I no longer belonged to. Around me, people went back to typing like nothing had happened. No one made eye contact. No one said goodbye. That was the part that hurt most. Not the job, not Darren's smug voice, but the silence, the way 30 people could pretend you'd never existed. I placed the last few items in the box, lifted it into my arms, and made my way down the main hallway one last time. Each step felt heavier than the one before. I didn't know where I was going. Home, maybe. Or to the car. Or into some abyss where all the invisible women go. And then I saw him. Raymond stood just beyond the hallway bend, next to his mop cart, watching me. He didn't speak right away. He didn't ask what had happened. He already knew. He walked toward me slowly, gently took the box from my hands, and set it on a bench by the wall. Then, with a steady hand, he reached into the front pocket of his gray uniform and pulled out a small object. A key. It looked old golden, slightly rusted around the edges, the kind you'd find in an attic or a storybook. He held it out in his palm like it was something sacred. "It's time," he said softly. I blinked, confused. Time for what? Raymond's eyes met mine. There was no pity in them, no sadness, only calm and something else. Something like conviction. "To breathe," he said. "Lorraine always told me, breathing isn't just about lungs. It's about the soul. That studio's been waiting for you, Camille. Way too long." My throat tightened. "Studio." He nodded and handed me a folded piece of paper with an address written in careful, blocky handwriting. 17 Sycamore Lane. I looked down at the key, then back at him. I don't understand." "You don't need to," he said. "Not yet." I stood there frozen, the key warm in my hand, like it had been waiting for my palm all this time. No one had ever handed me anything like this before. Not a key, not trust, not belief. Raymond smiled, a soft, weathered smile. "It's yours now." Lorraine would have wanted it that way. He didn't wait for thanks, didn't make a speech, just turned and pushed his cart down the hallway, disappearing like always. Quiet, constant, kind. And I stood there clutching a key to a place I'd never been, but somehow already felt like home. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed with the key still in my hand, its worn metal pressing gently into my skin. I must have turned it over 100 times, as if holding it long enough might whisper some clarity into my ears. Severance pay, unemployment forms, rent. The practical side of my brain screamed, focus on survival. But the rest of me, the part one thought had gone silent long ago, whispered something softer. Go. Around midnight, I got in my car and drove. The streets were empty, rain still trailing down the windshield in slow, lazy lines. Street lamps passed like ghosts. I followed Raymond's directions. Left on Maple, right past the old train depot, then down a quiet street lined with sagging porches and sleeping houses. 17 Sycamore Lane was a modest home with a small front yard, a crooked mailbox, a garden gnome missing one eye. It looked ordinary, the kind of place people forget exists. But at the end of the gravel path behind the main house stood a small detached building with faded blue siding and a slanted roof. A warm yellow porch light glowed above its door. I stepped out of the car and approached slowly, the key clutched tight in my fist. The lock was stubborn. I had to jiggle it twice before it gave way with a soft click. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The air smelled of old paint, cedar, and time. It was a single room, maybe the size of a small classroom, but it felt vast. Sunlight must have poured in during the day, through the tall windows, now cloaked in gauzy curtains. Wooden shelves lined the walls, cluttered with jars of dried brushes, tubes of half-used paint, and sketchbooks stacked like diaries. A canvas stood in the center of the room, covered by a sheet. I didn't touch it. Instead, I let my fingers brush along the worn work table, over a set of dusty charcoal pencils, a folded apron, a cracked ceramic mug with paint still clinging to the rim. This place wasn't just a room. It was a life, paused mid-breath. On the table, tucked beneath a jar of buttons, I found an envelope with my name written in slanted, careful script. Inside was a letter from Raymond. Camille, Lorraine always believed this studio had a soul. She said the walls soaked up every brush stroke, every sigh, and gave it back tenfold. When she passed, I couldn't bear to enter it. But when I saw you sketching behind the building that day, I knew. You've got the same light in your eyes. This space, it's yours now. Not charity, recognition. You are an artist. Even if the world tried to convince you otherwise, life is too short to live someone else's dream. Raymond, I sank into the nearest chair, my chest heaving with a mix of grief and something that felt frighteningly close to hope. For a long while I sat there in silence. Then, without thinking, I reached for a pad of paper in the drawer. My hands moved on their own, shaking slightly. I found a stick of charcoal, cracked but still usable. I turned to a fresh page and drew a line. It was jagged, too hard, not perfect, but it was mine, and for the first time in years I felt like I was breathing again. It started with one line, then another, and another. Every morning, I returned to Lorraine's studio like it was church. The sun poured in through the tall windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the air like whispers from her past. I didn't plan what I drew. I just let my hands remember. At first, it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. I drew what I saw: cracked teacups, flowers from the garden, the gentle slope of Raymond's back as he watered the tomatoes. I filled page after page, sometimes with nonsense, sometimes with fury. Some drawings I tore up before they even dried. Others I kept, taping them to the wall like little affirmations. You are still here. You still matter. Raymond would stop by now and then, sometimes with a sandwich, sometimes with nothing at all but his quiet presence. He never interrupted. He just sat in the corner, sometimes humming low and tuneless like a heartbeat. "You've got more color in your cheeks," he said once, handing me a cup of peppermint tea. "I think it's charcoal dust," I smiled. He smiled back, but gently. "No, it's something else." I wasn't earning anything yet. The severance package from Nova Access was enough to carry me for a while, and I dipped into what I'd saved over the years, money I thought I'd use for some rainy day that apparently had arrived. Still, there was fear. Always fear. Fear that I was wasting time, that I'd run out of money, and this fragile, beautiful thing I'd found would vanish. But every time doubt crept in, I'd go to the corner where Lorraine's old smock still hung from a hook. I'd touch the worn cloth, stained with reds and blues and greens. It reminded me that someone had lived here before me. And she had dared. The first time I sold a piece, it was almost an accident. Raymond's niece, Angela, came by one afternoon with her newborn. I was sketching the baby's profile, just for practice. She looked at it and asked if she could buy it. "It's just a sketch," I said, embarrassed. "It's him," she said. "That's enough." She paid me $50. I cried after she left, not because of the money, but because someone looked at something I made and saw value. It changed something inside me. Word spread, slowly but surely. Angela told her friends. I posted a few things online. I created a simple website, nothing fancy, just a portfolio and contact form. Orders trickled in. Pet portraits, nursery art, illustrations for someone's self-published poetry book. I began saying yes to things I would have once laughed at. A mural for a cafe. A painting of someone's backyard garden. A logo design. I was learning to live by brushstroke, by color, by gut. Within 6 months, I had a small list of returning clients. I was making enough to cover rent. And yes, I insisted on paying rent to Raymond, even though he grumbled every time I handed him the envelope. I bought new supplies, painted the walls a soft cream, installed brighter lights, but I left the essence of the place untouched. Lorraine was still here, in the quiet corners, in the way the room held warmth like a memory. On a shelf above the work table, I placed a photo I found buried in one of her sketchbooks, a black and white image of her laughing in front of a canvas, her hands covered in paint. Some days I'd whisper to it, just a thank you, just so she knew. The fear never completely left me. It clung to the edges, especially during quiet weeks. But every time I held a pencil, I felt stronger. I wasn't where I wanted to be. But for the first time, I wasn't running from who I was. And that was enough. 2 years passed, and the studio became my world. The name Camille Turner started appearing in local newsletters and gallery corners, usually followed by a modest blurb. Charming local artist, known for evocative line work and emotion-driven portraits. I laughed the first time I read that. Me known. As if the quiet girl in the cubicle ever imagined such a thing. I had enough work now to need help with admin and scheduling. A college intern came in twice a week. I built a client list, shipped art across 3 states, and had 3 cafes with my murals on their walls. None of it was flashy. None of it was easy. But it was mine. And all of it, every brushstroke, led back to him. Raymond still came by, though less frequently now. His knees were bothering him, and the winter air made his joints ache. But when he did visit, he walked around the studio like a man visiting a chapel. I think in his mind it still belonged to Lorraine. In a way it did. And maybe now it belonged to both of us. One morning, as I was rearranging some supplies, I found a photograph tucked in an old drawer I hadn't opened in months. It was small, creased at the edges, a black and white image of a younger Raymond and Lorraine, standing beside a lake, arms wrapped around each other, smiling so naturally it stopped my breath. They must have been in their 40s. He looked more relaxed. She looked radiant, cheeks full of joy, hands smudged with paint like always. There was so much life in that photo. And so much loss now that she was gone. An idea took hold of me. It wasn't commissioned. It wasn't paid for. It didn't have a deadline. But I knew, the moment I touched the paper, that it might be the most important thing I'd ever make. For weeks in between orders and online workshops, I worked on the painting in secret. I used every technique I knew, poured every part of myself into it. I didn't recreate the photo, I reimagined it. I painted Raymond and Lorraine as they might have been. Older now, wrinkles deeper, hair whiter. But together, sitting on that lakeside bench, her hand in his, still painting, still laughing, still whole. The day I finished, I cried. Not sad tears, something else. Something deeper, like closure, like reverence. I called Raymond and told him I had something I wanted to show him. He arrived wearing his best jacket, the brown corduroy one with the elbow patches. His hands trembled slightly when he held the warm mug of tea I handed him. I led him into the back room of the studio, where the finished painting stood, covered by a linen cloth. I have a gift for you, I said. He looked at me with tired but kind eyes. Camille, you don't owe me anything. I know, I said, smiling softly, but I owe her. I pulled the cloth away. Raymond stared. His body went still, like even breath might shatter the moment. His eyes welled with tears, then overflowed without warning. He reached forward, not to touch the canvas, but to steady himself against the table. How, he whispered. How did you know? I found the photo, I said quietly. The rest was imagination. And gratitude. He nodded, unable to speak. We stood in silence. The painting glowed beneath the skylight. Lorraine's eyes sparkled with that mischievous joy I imagined she must have carried her whole life. And Raymond. Well, he looked like the man I knew, just a little more at peace. After a long pause, he turned to me, voice trembling. "You didn't just give me a painting," he said. "You gave her back to me." I reached out and took his hand. "And you gave me a future." These days, I wake up before the sun. Not because I have to, but because I want to. The studio is quietest in the early morning, before emails, before orders, before the world remembers I exist. I make coffee, pull on my paint-streaked hoodie, and sit by the tall window with a fresh canvas and a soul that finally knows peace. Sometimes I still hear echoes of that office life, the clicks of keyboards, the flat tone of Darren's voice, the weight of feeling unseen. But they've grown quieter, like voices coming from a house I no longer live in. I haven't spoken to anyone from Nova Access since the day I walked out. No one ever reached out. No apologies. No closure. And honestly, I don't need it, because what I have now is better. A few weeks ago, I got a call from a children's book publisher. They'd seen my online portfolio. One of my illustrations had been shared in a parenting group, and they wanted to offer me a long-term contract to illustrate a full series. Not just one book, a whole series. When I hung up, I sat in the middle of the studio floor, surrounded by brushes and fabric and scraps of ideas. And I laughed, a big, open, ridiculous laugh that echoed off the walls like a choir. I didn't even realize I was crying until I tasted the salt on my lips. Lorraine would have loved that moment. So would Raymond. I still keep her photo on the shelf, next to a fresh jar of brushes and a tiny sketch of the magnolia tree I used to sit under behind the Nova Access building. Full circle, but better, because now the tree lives only in memory. And the memory belongs to me. Last week, a young woman named Alyssa stopped by the studio. She'd been following my work online and asked if I ever took apprentices. She looked like me, years ago, eyes full of something wild and quiet, fingers fidgeting with the sleeve of her thrift store sweater. I said yes, because someone once made space for me, and now it's my turn. That night, as I stood alone in the studio, I caught sight of my reflection in the tall window. My hair was pulled into a messy bun. There was paint on my cheeks, my fingertips, even my neck. And I looked. Alive. Not perfect. Not rich. Not famous. But seen. Raymond once told me, "The right doors open at the right time, but it's up to us to have the courage to walk through them." Back then, I didn't know what that meant. Now I do. Sometimes the door is a real one, old and rusted, behind a quiet house on Sycamore Lane. Sometimes it's a canvas, or a sketch pad, or a single, trembling line drawn in the dark. But always, it's the moment you stop asking for permission to be who you are. The world didn't give me that key. Raymond did. Lorraine did. And now I hold it in my hands, not with fear, but with purpose. Because I know who I am now. I'm Camille Turner. I'm an artist. And I'm home.